Hello everyone and welcome to this IANA webinar, The Truth About DVIRs, the Key to Road-Ready Equipment. I'm Hal Pollard, the Director of Education at IANA, and I am pleased to introduce today's panel, Crystal Frederick, Transportation Specialist in Compliance with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, Dave Hensel, President and CEO with Eagle Systems, and Mike Pagel, Manager of Industry Projects and Measures for BNSF Railway. Now, a little bit about what to expect in this webinar. We'll start off with introductions, then cover DVIRs and why they are so important, the current state of affairs with DVIR submission, major misconceptions about DVIRs, and what we can do about it. We'll follow it up with some Q&A. Now, let's get started. Crystal?
Thanks, Hal, and good afternoon, everybody. Again, my name is Crystal Frederick. As mentioned, I am with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, FMCSA, and I'm here to sort of give a little background about what exactly DVIRs are, provide the actual regulatory text that goes over that, and also talk about why DVIRs are so important. So, with that, what is a DVIR? DVIR is a driver vehicle inspection report. It is one of a number of tools that the FMCSA uses to focus on and improve overall safety in the operation of commercial motor vehicles. The regulatory text that goes over the specificity of what a driver vehicle inspection report is can be seen on the screen. But to put it simply, a DVIR is a report completed by drivers or motor carriers pointing out any damage or defects to the equipment. So really the important part is highlighted there in red. Now, I'm not going to read through each one of the elements that's covered by the DVIR, but you can see what they are. Brakes, lights, pretty straightforward stuff. One thing to keep in mind is that the regulatory text we have here, Part 39611B, specifically goes over what's required for IEPs and intermodal equipment. The requirements for all other motor carriers are slightly different, and if terribly interested in finding out what those are, that can be found at Part 39611A. So that's going to be the regulatory text immediately preceding this. So that covers the report itself, what should be in it, but when should these inspections be done? On the screen you have Part 39613, and the important part here is before driving a motor vehicle, including obviously intermodal equipment, a driver should be, and again the important part is highlighted in red, be satisfied that the motor vehicle is in safe operating condition. This means that drivers should check for the 9 elements listed in Part 39611B. That was the stuff listed in the previous slide. Before they take equipment onto the road, drivers should also review the last DVIR, and finally should sign the DVIR only if defects or issues that were noted have been repaired. So that covers when these inspections should be done. They should be done basically before equipment is taken out on the road. For more information on pre-trip inspections, because we have regulations that cover everything, you can go to Part 392.7b. So a point of clarification. There are circumstances in which a DVIR does not need to be completed, and I want to try to make that clear. So going back to Part 39611, in this case specifically A to I, it says that DVIRs must be prepared and submitted when defects or deficiencies are discovered or reported to the driver. What this ultimately means is that if a driver detects an issue with the vehicle or equipment and repairs it before the end of their shift, the driver does not have to complete a DVIR. So this is a situation where, somewhere along the way the driver notes that, there's a light out or something, has a replacement bulb, pops in a new one. If that was the only issue with the vehicle, they don't have to complete a DVIR. Now, if there were other things that were noted, then obviously a report would still have to be filled out in those circumstances. So, why is this so important? It can seem like something that's a bit tedious to do, but it's not without reason. The ultimate goal of everything we do at FMCSA is to promote and improve safe operations of commercial motor vehicles on our roadways. The DVIR is an important tool in that effort. By having drivers complete DVIRs, issues with intermodal equipment can be notified to IEPs so that this equipment doesn't make its way onto the roadway until it's repaired and ready to operate safely. So safety is always our number one ultimate goal, but it's not the only benefit of going through this process. Beyond that, it also saves time and money. If DVIRs were filled out whenever an issue was noted with intermodal equipment, it would mean that more of the equipment made available for interchange was road ready. This means less trips to the quick repair line. Everybody knows time is money, and no one wants to spend time, hours in some cases, in a quick repair line. Improving the overall readiness of intermodal equipment benefits everybody in the system. And finally, not to end on a down note, if all of that didn't persuade you to complete DVIRs, the final thing to keep in mind is that DVRs are, in fact, required, and if not completed, a driver can be cited for a violation. As mentioned before, this is only necessary when a defect is detected, but keep in mind drivers must still check their equipment before taking it out on the roadway. Ultimately, that is the only way they would know if there are any defects. So, why we're here today is IANA has put together some useful information sort of covering all of this information in a really accessible way. They've put together a handy little information card and video that goes over a lot of this stuff. And we'll get to take a look at that in a little bit. Right now, though, I believe Dave is going to provide us with some information on the current state of affairs. Dave?
Thanks, Crystal. Thanks, Hal. Again, I'm Dave Hensel with Eagle Systems, and primary role with this topic is I've led the DVIR task force for the last several years, so we're happy to share the information that we've put together to hopefully help move the industry forward, and we certainly appreciate Crystal's involvement with the webinar as it's a key to the whole industry, and particularly from a safety standpoint. So I'm going to go into the current state of affairs. We see a nice smiley-faced driver here, which is I think always great to see, but in reality, it's not very good. I debated on this slide to just put bad up there, but it's not good. The Road Ready Chassis Task Force group several years ago passed by IANA, and they did a study on compliance at the number of gates, and they found that the DVIR filed was less than 0.5%. So you can see we have a long way to go with all the industry stakeholders and the drivers and motor carriers. So part of our group here on the Inspection Reporting Standards Task Force is we spent a lot of time. We put a motor carrier survey out first, and then collated 10 key questions that we wanted to get out to the driver community, which I'll go through here in a minute here. We kind of collated, I kind of recapped what we found here, and we had significant participation, well over 1,000 drivers. You can see 50% of them, a fair amount of experience, over 7 years. The majority of the group, there's 10 regions that IANA uses to come up with the demographics. You can see 64% obviously from the Southeast and Midwest region, though we did have responses from all 10 of those regions, including even a few from Mexico and Canada. So it's a North American study that we put out there. As you can see in the intermodal industry, 87% of them are independent contractors. They hit all the locations that we go in and out. So we got good feedback from the rail terminals, container depots, marine terminals. And we also had a kind of an open-ended question of suggestions and things that you might let us, look at to help the industry. And we'll get into that in a few slides from now. So you can see some of the biggest issues identified. There was a lot of feedback on tires. And these are really the poor equipment that's out there, not so much on why they weren't filling out DVIRs or not identifying, but just the overall state of chassis of what they felt they were getting. So tires, lack of systematic maintenance at terminals, loading containers on bad chassis, and lack of terminal inspections. The other thing that's not on here is a very common theme, and I think Mike will even get into it more, but just the communication between all the entities, whether it's the motor carrier with the driver, whether it's the driver coming through the gate, the IEP with the maintenance vendors, just a whole host of issues that came up. So very, seems like a simple subject, but it's very complicated the more we got into it. And just kind of overall, and I know Mike will get into it a little bit, our goal was, from a task force standpoint, was, we're out there, we wanted to gain a greater understanding of why there was such low compliance in reporting on the DVIR, as well as we wanted to come up with a plan to help train or the right term is educate the drivers, educate gate personnel on reporting accurate defects. So that kind of encapsulates everything we wanted to accomplish, and then put together a communication plan to the industry stakeholders. So I'm going to go through the 3 top questions here that we came up with the results are. And we wanted to ask, are you aware, when you're aware of roadability defects, what do you do? What are the top reasons that you do? And we asked for 3 of them to, what are their 3 top reasons? And you can see 69%, no reason I always report the defect I'm aware of. And the concerning part about that is, as you can see from the study, it's only less than 0.5% of the time. So there's definitely a disconnect from what they're saying and from what reality is in the industry. Number 2 top answer, and we'll get into that too as well, is we gathered information, their fear or blamed of being charged. They don't want to be charged for something they don't think they're responsible for. And then the next one was, they always repair the chassis before they bring it back to the ER. And I won't go through each one, but we kind of focused in on those top 2 items of where the concerns were. Our next question is, of all the interchanges, how frequently are you discovering roadability defects? And as you can see, 45% of the respondents are less than 10% discovering defects. And in reality, based upon that Road Ready chassis study, 1 of every 2 chassis they looked at that in-gated has at least 1 defect. So there's definitely some cause for concern there. Then the final question, these are kind of the 3 of the top 10 questions that we thought were really important to go through, is, when picking up a chassis and finding a defect, what is the most common action you would take? And we had asked them to rank it 1 to 4, and what I took that data and I kind of just wanted to encapsulate what percentage was each one of these categories the number 1 answer from the driver. So you could see that the biggest one is they just move on to a chassis, next another chassis. 2nd, go to quick repair. 3, report the chassis to the yard staff. And 4, request a flip. So you can see how much time is wasted when the driver comes in and gets a bad chassis. So our message is going to be, if you report the defect on the DVIR, when you get into the terminal, you have a greater chance of finding a good chassis. And we need to be able to work with the gate facilities and the IEPs. They need to know this information so they can provide a good chassis for the community. I wanted to include this. We did this at one of our roundtable sessions back in May. And this is kind of an encapsulation of all the things that came up on what can we do to make things better. And it kind of got imported into this great kind of word cloud to get people thinking about what's happening and what's going on. And obviously, when I look at it, besides the report chassis damage, but from a motor carrier standpoint, my perspective, I see wait time in here, lights, tire issues, equipment defects, problems. So that we didn't get much good feedback. It's the equipment's poor. What can we do to help get better equipment out there for everybody. And it starts, I think, really with the DVIR to give everyone a chance. If it reports the DVIR, then we got a chance to improve the equipment. Besides being the law, we got to get the equipment fixed for the industry. So the roadblocks to improving compliance, and we've spent a lot of time on it. And Mike's got some really good slides and a card that we put together. As we identified 3 major misconceptions by drivers that we're trying to help identify. And I don't want to take away from Mike's presentation, so that'll be coming up in another slide. The other areas, we focused more on the driver than we did gate operations, but with the driver, some of that driver feedback saying, gate operations couldn't accept that feedback. So, I think tends to be a driver perception versus reality. Do all the gates able to handle a DVIR, or do they not know what they're doing? And we need to work with the gate operations really to identify, is it just a perception problem at the industry, or is it a reality where they can't help capture this information? And we want to make sure we engage the motor carrier and all the stakeholders. How do we bring all these multiple entities together to improve the process? And then the last piece here is, what we're struggling is, how do we measure success in improving DVIR compliance? How do we move the needle? Certainly there's a long way to go if we're only getting 0.5% reported, and there's 1.2 of every chassis in the terminal has a defect. Obviously, we have a long way to go, and a lot of education to start moving the stick. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mike.
All right. Thanks, Dave. My name is Mike Pagel. I am the manager of projects, industry projects and measures in the business unit operations group at BNSF Railway, and I've had the opportunity to serve with Dave on this task force committee from the earliest stages of the committee itself. And so it's been a good experience. I've had a nice opportunity to learn a lot about DVIRs and kind of the inner workings of DVIRs. But this afternoon, I think the part that I'll speak about are essentially the communication plan. So just to kind of leverage what Dave talked about and talk a little bit about what our plan is for communicating the importance of DVIRs and overcoming some of those major misconceptions that are out there regarding DVIRs, and then kind of the call to action. So we feel like that it's a team effort, it's an industry-wide issue that certainly needs industry-wide response, and so we think that there's a role for a lot of people to play. So as Dave mentioned, our task force committee did quite a bit of homework to understand the current state of affairs with DVIRs. From our perspective, that research was a very important task for the committee, but it was just the first step. Once we had a better understanding of the situation, we were able to build a communication strategy that defined our goals, and those are goals that, if achieved, would lead to a higher rate of DVIR compliance. So a couple of things. Back to the communication plan goal, reading through those survey results that Dave talked about, we knew that there had to be some change, a change in behavior, but also a change in mindset too. So we developed the marketing communications plan to help facilitate that change. Our goals with this plan were fivefold, essentially. Number one, to reinforce the importance of reporting defects through the DVIR process. Number two, to dispel any lingering misconceptions, and we'll talk a little bit more about that momentarily. Goal number three was to educate the audience on the ease of submitting DVIRs. That leads as something from one of the previous misconceptions that DVIRs were complicated. The fourth goal of the marketing communications plan was to convey the what's in it for me benefits. We believe that if we are able to communicate a benefit to the driver, I think there would be more widespread adoption and compliance in terms of understanding how it not only benefits them, but kind of the entire supply chain as a whole. It's got a ripple effect, so to speak. And then, of course, we want to foster renewed levels of trust and cooperation among all stakeholders, similar to the note that I had regarding it kind of being a collective effort across the board industry-wide. So once we had the goals defined, we kind of explored options for what we would create and distribute that would have the greatest impact. The two tangible items that our committee created to support our communications efforts are a dual-sided information card and a short video. We felt like these items could give us pretty significant reach and would be effective at communicating our messages. Let's take a deeper look at these two communications pieces. First, let's take a look at the card. So this slide kind of shows both sides of the card. On side one, you've got the, it's kind of three parts there. The first part kind of is the benefit-oriented part. So what if as a driver, and we hope this will catch their attention, what if as a driver that you can have access to better, more reliable roadworthy chassis? As a driver, you can also be more productive by increasing your turn times at terminals, and then also contribute to making the roadways a safer place for all. We felt like listing those three benefits up high on that first side certainly would have an impact and catch the driver's attention. And then the middle part of that side one is about, well, here's what you do. Here's kind of a three-step process. You obviously, inspecting the equipment is important, reporting any defects that are found, and then the third part is experiencing that improvement in the terminal experience, getting quicker turn times. And then the bottom portion of that side one acknowledges to the drivers that, hey, it's not all on them. That there's quite a bit of a collective effort here involved. By the way, and I think Hal mentioned it at the very beginning, the information card and the video both are available for download from the IANA website. So with that, let's take a little bit of a deeper dive with respect to the common misconceptions that are on slide 2. Reviewing those survey results from the drivers, may have mentioned this earlier, it was pretty much of an eye-opening experience, but it was important because it gave us that visibility into what was contributing to a low DVIR compliance rate. Especially through the comments portion of the survey, we saw time and time again there was a common set of responses. And it became clear to us that there are prevalent misunderstandings about DVIRs, misunderstandings that seem to bubble up time and time again in that comment section of the survey. So as a task force committee, we saw this as an opportunity. This was an opportunity for us to try to dispel these common misconceptions about DVIRs. We believe, and I think Dave and all the members of the task force committee would agree, that we believe that dispelling these misconceptions can really have a significant positive effect on DVIR compliance. In my mind, if drivers have a more clear understanding of DVIRs and how better diligence on DVIR reporting can benefit them, they're going to be more likely to be proactive in acknowledging equipment defects. But we also hope that they see the bigger picture, that there's this entire brotherhood of fellow drivers that they have that can also experience the benefits, and the intermodal supply chain as a whole too can experience the benefits of better efficiency, better reliability of equipment, and then obviously the safer roadways as well. So back to these misconceptions. Here's misconception number 1. And I'll walk through these, and there'll be time at the end of the webinar to ask questions if necessary. But misconception number 1 is a DVIR will trigger a rebill to drivers for the expense of repairing a chassis. The reality is, and this probably is the most prevalent misconception that we heard, but the reality of it is that this statement is false. The simple act of submitting a DVIR does not incriminate the driver, nor does it automatically trigger a rebill to the driver for the expense of the repairs. The purpose of the DVIR is to bring immediate visibility to defective equipment. This DVIR allows the facility operator and the equipment owner to take the proper actions. For example, let's say that a defective chassis is brought back to a rail facility by a driver and no DVIR is filed upon the in-gate. Now, there's a pretty good chance that chassis will stay in the mix of active chassis and will be loaded with another container, especially if the defect on that chassis isn't clearly visible. But if a DVIR is declared at the gate when that defective chassis is brought to a facility, the facility operator, the equipment provider, and the maintenance and repair team will be able to address the issue more promptly and repair the defect before the chassis is put back in the slot for outgate. So, simple issues such as worn tread on tires or tail lights that go out, those are general maintenance issues that the IEPs handle. Now, if there's damage due to any negligence on the driver's behalf, that's an instance where the driver could be potentially held liable, and that determination would be made at a later time, outside the scope of the DVIR filing process itself. So that's misconception number 1. Misconception number 2 is a DVIR is complicated. The reality of it is that submitting a DVIR is simple. At an intermodal hub with an automated gate system, AGS as we call it, for example, the drivers simply need to look for the prompt asking them if there are any defects with the equipment that they're handling. And that's part of the sequence of prompts that they get, for example, at the BNSF facility, the facilities that we have with our AGS locations. So by providing the notification of that defect, the chassis itself then is going to be flagged as what we call a bad order chassis, and it would not be used again until after that defect has been addressed. Now, it's true that the process of filing a DVIR may be slightly different from one facility to the next facility, but for the most part, it's a relatively simple process, and the core of the process itself is relatively the same as well. Misconception number 3, we heard a lot that some drivers out there think that DVIRs are optional. The reality of that is that the requirement of filing a DVIR is not optional. Filing DVIRs may not always be necessary, but it is clearly required if applicable. Filing a DVIR is not necessary if there are no known defects to the equipment. So if the driver doesn't even know that there's a defect, then by that token, he's not obligated to report it. You can't address something that you don't really know about. However, if the driver does know of at least one defect to the equipment that he or she is handling, that FMCSA regulation that Crystal was referencing, it requires the driver to provide the notification of that defect through the DVIR process. And so, again, it comes down to just bringing greater awareness and visibility to the defects so that the facility operators, other key personnel at the facility, can address the defective chassis and get that repaired for the next driver who will come and pick up that chassis at a later time. Because to Crystal's point, and I think Dave referenced it too, is that, you know, a driver is all about efficiency, and the last thing that he wants to do is experience some sluggishness and inefficiencies within the hub itself. He wants to be out on the open road, and when he hooks up to a chassis that has a defect and requires a quick repair or a flip or something like that, that's just time that he's missing out on being on the road and being as productive as what he can be. So with that in mind, we wanted to talk about the video itself. This video was essentially created and produced from the driver's perspective. You know, the whole committee was involved in it, and we used real life drivers and M&R personnel within the video. But our intent was to truly relate to the drivers and some of the frustrations that they encounter with respect to the equipment. And so by getting to the heart of the matter, we believe that the messages communicated in this video will hopefully strike a chord with the drivers and help them understand how filing DVIRs can have a benefit for not only themselves, but then also for their peers, you know, other drivers that they share the road with. So let's launch into this video, and it's about a 4.5-minute video. It may be a little bit laggy due to the webinar, but again, this kind of gets you a sense for what we're dealing with.
My name is G.C. Fairclough. I've been a driver since '83, right after I got out of service. I did everything I could to stay away from it. Here I am, 35 years, 40 years later. I love it, I do. Everywhere you go, there's something new to see. I could get out here and crank up some good tunes, hit the cruise control, life is good. Now see how that guy just comes in? He doesn't realize a loaded semi at 60 miles an hour takes 435 feet to stop. And here's where the congestion starts. You got guys coming from everywhere, and they're all trying to get in, get out, and therein lies our problem. Nobody's taking the time to pre- and post-strip their trucks. And that includes the chassis and the container. That's why their equipment's the way it is. I can't do the math to take a few seconds to fill out a DVIR versus sitting in a quick repair line. Oh, I found it. I got 2 tail lights out. Get it back here, fill out the DVIR. Together, as a group of professional drivers, we can fix the equipment issue. This would gradually get better. A guy could make more money. He could be home when he says he's going to be home. It's a lot easier if we just took care of each other. It took me, what, a minute and a half? You guys just need to fill out the DVIR. Man, after 2 chassis I had to turn in, I sure hope that this one goes well. Right there, that's my girl. Here she is. That's what I wanted. Oh, let's hope this is a good one. I know, girl, we've done a couple of them today, haven't we? Son of a gun. Well, we found this leaking wheel seal, boys and girls. Might as well finish the rest of it. That light's working. That looks good. Let's go up here and see what the quick repair line looks like. Look at these guys. 7, there's 8 guys in this line, I make 9. Not going anywhere quick. I'm gonna go talk to them. Hey y'all, we're having a hell of a day with these chassis. First one had the lights out. Second one's tires are bad. Anybody filling out DVIRs around here?
I don't have a problem filling out the DVR, but how do we get more drivers to fill out the DVR?
That'll allow us as maintenance guys to go out there and get ahead of it before you guys get here.
The guys I talked to out on the road said, well, we're gonna get charged for it.
Certainly it shouldn't be you guys' fault if you have a flat tire or if you have a light go out. That's normal wear and tear.
A lot of drivers don't know that, and that's
Exactly.
what they wanted to know.
Can we go someplace and get out of this heat and talk about it? You guys got some good ideas. Let's go.
The drivers are our customers, and I see a lot of drivers that get really, really frustrated.
The worst thing that can happen is once you prepared yourself to be able to drive and then you have a problem.
But if that chassis would have been reported when it was brought in, I would not have been put in this situation and be late to my customer.
We're the first line of defense. We know what's going on with the chassis.
We have a great opportunity when we turn them in to report whatever is wrong.
So that we can go out and be proactive instead of reactive.
It only takes a minute, and that minute is going to save another driver potentially an hour, 2 hours, or 3 hours. I've never had an instance where I've had to pay for a tire or a light. That's going to be normal wear and tear, and drivers are not responsible for that.
I believe that the DVIR system is very, very important.
And when a driver sees a problem, he shouldn't just ignore it.
Report it, it'll get fixed.
I feel like it's my duty to look out for the other drivers out there and make sure that I either report problems when I see them or have them fixed right away.
You know, it was good talking to those other guys, knowing that some people are thinking the way I am, and we can either start doing this ourselves, filling out the DVIRs, or we can spend time over there. And oh, by the way, that's a light day. It doesn't take long to fill out the DVIR, but it starts with you, the professional driver.
So there you have the stars of the show. So something that we feel like actually might have some pretty nice effect in terms of getting through to drivers and helping dispel some of those misconceptions that are out there. So just advancing to the next slide, how do we get involved? What can we do collectively to help progress this DVIR issue? We feel like everyone in the industry has a role to play. It's going to have to be a team effort. It's a unified effort because this doesn't just fall on the driver's shoulders. Equipment providers, facility operators, inspectors, M&R personnel, they all have a role to play. However, it does start with the drivers. I think one of the drivers mentioned that they're on the front lines. You know, no one knows the condition of the chassis better than the driver that's pulling that chassis. So it's important for them to get on board with this DVIR process. Now, it's not necessarily something that we expect to change overnight. You know, to me, it's a bit of a culture change too. It's a change of mindset, and it may take a little bit of time before drivers are convinced that what we're telling them is accurate, and that before they actually get into the habit of submitting those DVIRs when they know about a defect. So here's kind of where we're asking for help. Whenever possible, be diligent about distributing these info cards that are available on the IANA website. They're available for both download and print. And also share the video with drivers at meetings, training sessions, wherever you have a driver audience. Take that opportunity to share this video with them. We've also created a few questions for use in a post-video discussion to help drivers further understand the key messages, because I think it's for one thing to watch the video, but I think it's another thing that if you actually have a discussion about it, tee up some questions that are related to the video, then the key messages really start to sink in at that point. Facilitate those discussions with your driver if you can. And then for those of you who have websites where you have the opportunity to post the video on your website, or social media outlets, Twitter, Facebook, any of the social media outlets, use the DVIR, the hashtag DVIR truth to get as broad a coverage and distribution as we can out of that. So it's really important to, in addition to all that, correct the misconceptions when you hear them. No fake news here with DVIRs. Just let the key stakeholders know what the truth is about them and what their benefits are. So, the bottom line is, we're all in this together. It takes everyone in the industry kind of doing their part and pulling all in the same direction. And we have a role to play in communicating the key parts about this and kind of helping drivers overcome any apprehensions that they have that may be contributing to this noncompliance. But in the end, I'm convinced that we can make a difference and that greater DVR compliance will lead to improvements in safety and greater quality of equipment and better turn times at the hubs for the drivers. Hal, that's my last slide, so I think we'll turn it over to you. Maybe we'll take a few questions if there are any.
Absolutely. The first question is kind of a short one, and it's about nomenclature. What's the difference between a defect and damage, or is there any?
Dave, you want to take that one?
When we're looking at a defect, a defect can incorporate that damage. But from a DVIR standpoint, there's the 9 things that Crystal went through that are brakes, tires, lights. So to me, a defect, if the light's out, it's a defect. If it's there's a brake is out of adjustment, it's a defect. Where damage, when we're talking about damage, is really when the driver gets in an accident, abuses the piece of equipment, and that's really where it's a good question. It's the fine line of where that guy's worried about being charged or not. So if he reports a defect and it's a normal wear and tear item, I view that's a defect where he's not going to get charged. And damage is where there's abuse of equipment, hits the curb, does something to that chassis. He's going to get charged for it.
And this is Crystal. I'll jump in real quick. Just from a regulatory standpoint, both are covered under, when a DVIR is required. So there's not a great distinction from that perspective. Whether it's defect or damage, it still requires that the DVIR be completed.
All right. So here's a question. This goes to the 0.5% question. Is the 0.5% the average of all in-gates or just ones that needed repair? Realizing damage does occur on-ramp from time to time. Yeah, my understanding is that is the average across all sites. So it wasn't a specific site. That was the total of all of the sites that were surveyed. And they were significant. That was a significant undertaking that the Road Ready Chassis Task Force did to. Here's one fairly timely, actually, and this might be best for you, Crystal. Will the move to ELDs have an impact on DVIR submission?
It might. I think that's something that's kind of yet to be determined. I guess we'll see as the implementation rolls out. Beyond sort of waiting to see, we have an ELD team here that's been working furiously, getting ready for implementation, and that's something I could follow up with them to see if they have any further insight on it. But yeah.
Well, my assumption is I know some of the ELD providers do have an option to submit DVIRs through their software. So.
Right, but that's it's going to that's all going to be affected by some of them do, in which ones drivers and carriers choose to go with. So, I mean, if it's a feature that ends up being really popular, obviously more of the providers will add that in. But it's a little bit of a we'll see.
Yeah, and I think this is Mike Pagel, by the way, and I think from the perspective of adopting any kind of new technology to gain greater compliance, the industry is always changing. There's always new technologies coming out, and so any way that or any adjustments that we could make to the process that still have the same bottom line effect in terms of getting the end result that we want, I think that we as an industry need to embrace any kind of new technology or new changes or new modifications to kind of the old way that we've done it, just to be able to gain that benefit and gain greater compliance. I think that we as an industry should have an open mind to that and just see if that's a possibility.
It might even be, as all these motor carriers move forward with their own app, their own dispatch app too, there might be ways, in conjunction with the ELD, how does it, better methods of communicating the DVIR.
Here's a question. Where is it in the regulations that specifies that the driver is provided with a copy of the previous DVIR? How does that work with the changes to not require a no defect DVIR to be reported? I guess that's another one for you, Crystal.
Yeah, so it's in there somewhat in 396.13, 613B, which says review the last driver vehicle inspection report. But I know in a practical sense, sometimes those aren't always available, and it's a practical matter of reviewing them when they're available, but specifically where it's called out, that's where it's called out.
Here's one. If a driver is cited for failure to file a DVIR, what is the fine associated with the citation? If not a set amount, how is the fine calculated?
Well, that one is definitely more for our investigators, but it's absolutely something I can get and provide after the fact. And also, I don't think we got to, I think we actually have one more slide after this, and this may be a good point to share that if there are any questions that people have and their question doesn't get answered, at least for me, my email address, crystalfrederick@dot.gov. People can always contact me there, and I am more than happy to follow up and get any information that you need.
Thanks, Crystal. And yeah, we put that slide up for folks. We've got a bunch of questions rolling in here. Is there anything that could be done to simplify the DVIR reporting process at the gate? For example, asking if the chassis is damaged instead of reporting problems on the 9 parts of the chassis.
Yeah, let me take a stab at that one.
Okay, I think that's one of my favorites. But go ahead.
Well, let me just tee it up, and you can certainly embellish on what I'm talking about. So I think that's a great question. I think there are opportunities to kind of simplify how we arrive at a DVIR at the gate. Currently we ask the question, and it's a little bit of a complicated question. We ask if there are any, I think it's the DVIR roadability defects that they have to report. So if you're a driver and you pull up to an AGS facility and you kind of look at that question, it's not really clearly articulated. So I think there are some opportunities to change the ask, the way that we ask the question, and to simplify to say, any issues with the chassis that you're pulling? Just simplify the question. If it's yes, then is there also an opportunity to consider why are we, making them declare one of the 9 defect categories? Could we just bypass that? Because what happens at our facilities is once that DVIR is claimed and that defect is reported, it goes off for further inspection, and there's a complete inspection done. So even if a driver declares, say, tires as a defect, not only does the inspector look at tires, but he's going to look at everything else as well. So with that in mind, and because he's already doing a full inspection, is it really necessary to declare one of the 9 defect categories? So I think there are opportunities with that. Dave, I didn't know if you had anything else to add.
Well, I mean, I think in conjunction with that, in order to get that done, though, there is some work that, we have to work with the FMCSA, since those 9 components are a regulation. But, we've talked about it a lot in our task force meetings, operations committee, is, if you just ask the guy or gal to say, is there a defect, and capture that, then we're so far ahead of the game. And that's, to me, I think the best way to give a better opportunity for the IEP to know something's wrong with it, and then get it repaired, and then have a good piece of equipment when that driver's there to pick it up. So from my standpoint, it's just the easier we can make it for that driver to report, it's going to help, rather than sit there and get confused by the 9 different items. And we've talked about it, and I think it's something I think maybe can get done down the road, and it would help. But
yeah. But it's all part of a discussion that needs to keep going. We've got time for a couple more. We've got a bunch of questions, and I apologize to those folks that don't get their questions answered. But as Crystal mentioned, we've got our contact information up here. Here's a quick one that I'll throw in because it's come up a couple of times. Does IANA have some kind of service that can help streamline the DVIR submission process? Short answer is yes, the Information Services has a solution for that. You can go to uiia.org and get more information about that. We could probably sneak in a couple more here. Is there any data on the percentage of DVIRs that had been detected in the years before FMCSA changed the rule eliminating the no defect? I'm assuming no, but I don't want to jump to conclusions.
Nothing comes to mind, at least on our end.
And I think our research started on that after the final rule. If I'm not mistaken. That's right, isn't it, Dave?
Yes, yeah.
Here's a good question. This is from somebody that seems like they transport chassis that they know are damaged on flatbeds. Do they need to report those chassis when they bring them back? I think I know the answer, but it seems like it's a problem that could happen. So.
Yeah, in that case, the equipment itself isn't in transportation operation, so I would say no to that.
But they do need to alert the IEP they're returning it to that there is a problem with it.
Yes.
Here's one. I did a study of our data looking at ocean facilities in one city. We found that 50%, all caps, of the repairs done at Roadability could have been avoided if a DVIR was completed. I guess that's more of a statement, but that's a pretty impressive statement that's coming from an IEP.
And I think that's just a testament, too, of how important DVIR compliance is, that if you're seeing that kind of number, just imagine the efficiency gains that we can get at those facilities, especially where we talk a lot about supply chain optimization and the drive to increase productivity there. So I think that just speaks to the importance of DVIRs.
And I'd add to that, with the IEPs I've talked to through this process, I think that their message to me, and being a motor case, you just report it. They're just looking for that information.
This one, probably one that we'll end on, but I think it expresses some of the frustrations of the driver community, but also I think speaks to the collective solution that the DVIR process presents is what will the industry stakeholders of railroads and terminal operators do to gain the trust of the driver fleet? For example, will the industry start to back away from charging drivers for blown tires? I know, for example, that flats are considered normal wear and tear. Does a blown tire fall into that category?
I know I would answer it as a motor carrier, but I'm sure it's different as an industry from an IEP standpoint. Mike?
I think there are, across the board, across the industry, there probably are some variances with respect to how that's handled. But a blown tire, it's probably the effect of a tire with worn treads that in most cases should be considered general maintenance. But if it's a contribution to what we call a skid flat that may be the effect of a poor driving practice, that sort of thing, well then in that case maybe the driver is responsible for that and would have to be culpable.
And the blown tire term's really gone away from the industry. So you would be just you run it flat. You've used the tire to destruction as opposed to something else.
If we can get to some consistency, just to piggyback off what Dave was saying, that if we as an industry can get to some consistency so that the drivers have some pretty firm expectations and consistent understanding for what they're responsible for and what they're not responsible for, I think that kind of helps build that faith and that trust among the driver community with us.
And I think that Brian, I would add here too, because I know we're running short of time, and the whole thing is this doesn't all fall on the driver, and it's incumbent on everybody to fix the problem, and for so long it's always just fallen on the driver, and we need to get some of that off of them and get the entities to work together to put a good piece of equipment on the road.
No, that's a great way to end it. And the DVIR is the red flag for the equipment provider and the maintenance vendor to be able to know that there's a problem, get that piece of equipment out of the supply and get it fixed, so you're not taking it back out the next time you come back in that yard or your colleagues. Well, unfortunately, we have run out of time. I'd like to thank our panel for their work work today. I'd like to thank all the attendees for hanging in there with us and their great questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them. As I mentioned before, if you'd like more information, there's information on the tools that the task force put together at IANA's website. The video is also available on YouTube. You can just search for IANA DVIR. There's information available about DVIR service at UIAA. You can also get information on the rule itself at so that's fmcsadot.gov.